It's great to be here, and when I asked John what he wanted me to share specifically about, he just invited me to share my story, and it's always great, I think, to hear other people's stories to inspire each other and encourage each other. So my story, I guess, includes a lot of different adventures in the last 9 years since I heard the call to be Human Shield in Iraq, and then to take on the life basically of a pilgrim. I call myself a pilgrim, and depthing that journey in the teaching of non-violence. And so the first trip to Iraq was as part of the Human Shield movement. Then I returned 2 other times to do aid work and human rights monitoring and things like that. And there was a third trip. Then I went to the West Bank of Palestine, where I was there for 4 months. And after that, probably would have been Gaza, and last year Afghanistan. In between that, when I was in Australia, experimenting with challenging war and militarism here at home, so challenging our government's policies on war and militarism. So that involved breaking into an American spy base that we have in the centre of Australia, where many Australians don't know about. This is pretty dodgy in that it's at a US-run military spy base sitting in the middle of Australia's desert. It's called Pine Gap. You may have heard of it, but you probably don't know a lot about it, and that's because we're not allowed to know a lot about it. And if you are a member of Parliament in Australia's Parliament today and you ask for a briefing on Pine Gap, it will be refused. Australian members of Parliament are not allowed to know what goes on there. If you're an American congressman or woman, you are actually able to get more information because of its control by the US. So we thought, a group of us thought, that that was unacceptable, and that there needed to be some accountability, especially since Pine Gap was so important to the war in Iraq. It was very strategic. I remember one defence analyst saying the sending of Australian troops to Iraq, there was at first only, say, 1,500 to 2,000, was very, very minor. It was tokenistic, and it was barely a contribution to the war in Iraq. So if they were pulled out, everything would have continued on as it did. But if peace activists at that time had also challenged the role of Pine Gap, then that would have made a difference in terms of Pine Gap being absolutely crucial. I'll just give you one example. I was at Al Shwala, actually I might read it out. I was at Al Shwala Marketplace, which is a working class neighbourhood in Baghdad, and this also explains a bit about my story and why I do what I do. This is the second week of the war, when the shock and awe bombing was going on, and we were travelling around Baghdad to see the damage and to bear witness to what was happening. We were in a marketplace in the Al Shwala district of Baghdad, stepping slowly and carefully through the mess. Dark red pools of blood, twisted metal, mashed up chunks of fruit and cardboard are soaked into the blood and mud, along with pieces of human flesh. The people here throw their fists in the air and shout in defiance at the force and horror of the US strike that caused this. A man in the crowd shouts at us, "Do your people accept this, killing children? Do Western people have no honour?" "We don't support this," I hear one of my group say. "We stand for peace." Overwhelmed by the screams of mothers grieving, the foul stench, the puddles of blood, I walk away, nauseous, my eyes stinging with scorching hot tears. Everything I feared about this war is happening here, right before my eyes. When I'm back on the bus that brought us here, I rest my head on my knees. Then I notice blood stains on my boots. Blood from a human being, an Iraqi person from Al Shwala, is there on my boots. I suddenly feel faint, my body goes limp and my vision blurs. I squeeze my eyes shut, regain focus, and then become fixated on the boots. Now, trembling with shock, my eyes are burning with hard, bitter tears. The blood will come with me now. Perhaps it's from a son or daughter of one of the women wailing right now. I want to run, but I can't move my eyes away from the bloodstains. I want to hide, to cover my eyes, but then I won't see. I have to be here. I have to see all of this. I have to tell this story. 65 men, women and children were killed on that day. That's whose blood and flesh was on the ground. And the missile strike that landed on that marketplace came from a US jet fighter plane, the coordinates of which it was announced as a mistake the following day, that it was not meant to go there, and there was an apology that the people, it was acknowledged that the people should not have been killed. It was a mistake. The coordinates that directed that missile that day came from Pine Gap. So when we went, my friends, to challenge the function of Pine Gap, this wasn't an abstract concept. This wasn't trying to make connections that were kind of out there. It was very, very direct. So on the last day of our trial, so we ended up breaking into the place. We called it a citizen's inspection for suspected terrorist activity, because we were challenging the definition of terrorism. So we had our white coats and we had hats and we had our citizens inspection team written on it. And we wanted to go and make an inspection for suspected terrorist activity. So we managed to get in, and that was a miracle in itself. That's another story. And in the last day of our trial, every day I dressed up as you do when you go to court, and I tried to look nice and respectable. And the last day I wore a dirty pair of hiking boots into the courtroom. And when I gave my address to the jury of men and women from Alice Springs, I drew their attention to my boots, because there was a stain on my boots. And I said, I've brought in to the courtroom with me the blood of a human being from Al Shuwala Marketplace who was killed because of the information that was collected from Pine Gap. And I invited the jury to honour the humanity of the person whose blood was on my boots, because it was there with us now. And I asked them politely to find us not guilty. So the jury went to consider the verdict, and the judge directed the jury to find us guilty. I mean, we were there, we were caught there, it was pretty clear. But obviously someone within the jury wanted to find us not guilty, or maybe more, because they deliberated for about 5 hours when it normally would have taken 20 minutes. And when the jury came out, there's some who clearly had been in tears and had been crying. So when I'm not, I guess, over in these places giving solidarity face to face, what I like to do, and there's quite a movement of people in Australia challenging here the role that our governments are playing, because once we know what's going on, once we know the impact of our government's war policies, when you know that, you can't not know. And so when you know, you can't sweep it away, then your choice is, how am I going to respond? What my decision will be: do I remain silent, or do I actually speak up and challenge this? So out of all those adventures in all those places, really feel free at the end. I'll just talk for a little bit, and at the end we can hopefully have some Q&A and good discussion time with whatever topic you want to raise, because out of all of those, they're all quite different, and something might have sparked your particular attention. So at the end we can talk about any of those experiences I've had. But what I want to share tonight is my story, and the story that's got me started on this activism, and that's the war in Iraq and being a human shield. I was speaking to a group of high school students at Waverley College when I first got back in 2003, and these are about 15-year-old boys, and I did the talk that I was doing at that point, just got back from the war, and at the end a young boy put up his hand. He said, Miss, could you explain to me, why did you go? Why did you decide to go? And so I gave the typical answer that I usually give about opposing the war and all the rest. He went, no, really? He said, really, why did you go? And I said, well, thank you. I said, you've just given me an invitation to go deeper, because normally I would not assume that people want to know my personal story, just the political story of the day, because it was all around at that time. But this boy wanted to hear that. And it's in places like this, a gathering that's in a church setting, that I feel that I'm able to go into that story as well. So I'm going to assume to do that tonight, because my journey has been very much a physical journey. It's been extremely physical and in your face. But it's been more so an inner journey, an interior journey. And I'm just going to read another passage that explains, if I had been more articulate at that particular time, I would have shared this with that boy. Can't remember what I told him, but it would have been something to do with my spirituality. This part I'm going to read now is about when I went in February 2003 and people were trying to talk me out of it. And people were trying to say, Donna, come on, it's a bit extreme. I don't think that's necessary, because we didn't know what was going to happen. But I felt deep within myself that it was the right thing. There was no way I was going to be talked out of it. And so I say, I realise there is no straightforward, no academic way to explain my decision to them. There are no guarantees of safety in the call of a stirring heart. It's a mystery, and to analyse it too much would not be right. I want to stand by my heart. It feels full of love for my fellow human beings in Iraq, and when people love, they do things that might seem strange or extreme. If I stay at home, who am I then? Someone who listened to her heart and then ignored its call? Some don't accept my heart's call on me, but many others do. They had felt it too in their life and knew exactly what I meant when I said I had to go. So back in 2003, I was 30-something girl travelling at the time. I'd left my job in Sydney. I'm a journalist by trade, so I worked in the media for many years in newspapers, and then I was also involved in politics since my teenage years, a bit obsessed with politics actually, and I inevitably then ended up working as a press secretary for a minister in the New South Wales Labor government. So that was my path. The way that I was going to try and make a difference in the world for me was going to be politics. From a very young age I'd made this decision. But I don't probably have to explain too much that being involved in New South Wales Labor politics under the Carr government quickly left me disillusioned. So I was there when all of the current characters who are now disgraced, being sacked, or in ICAC, on the front pages of newspapers, they were my colleagues. And so the more senior levels I got in my position, the more disappointed and appalled I became at the way that it was just a game. It was power plays, it was tit for tat, it was very aggressive. I just wanted to be a nice girl, and I was actually encouraged to be vindictive and angry, and to, even if someone was in another party, just to despise and dislike them, even if I had no other reason to. And here I was praying the prayer of St. Francis in the evenings, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And then the next day I had to lie and I had to be mean. So I left that position hoping that there would be another way that I could make a difference in the world. And when I left that, I decided to go on a pilgrimage, and I printed up business cards with a Celtic logo as the symbol, and the business card just read Donna Mulhern, pilgrim and storyteller, because that's what I wanted to be, to be on a journey that was an interior journey, and who knows where I might end up. So I left that role, not knowing what would happen, where I would go, where I'd end up, and not knowing where my next cent would come from. But I felt alive and I felt exhilarated. And I recall the words of Jesus in the Gospels when he said, when you lose your life, you find it. And so I was losing something that had been in my life for a long time, and that was sad, and there was a lot of grief involved in that. But the finding was absolutely exhilarating and exciting, very exciting. And so around the same time, I started delving deeper into the teaching of non-violence. Now, what led me there, as opposed to other types of teachings? Well, a few years earlier, I'd had a very life-transforming experience, and that I moved from being what we would call now a fundamentalist. And I think if you conjure up the image of what we think of when we think of the word fundamentalist, quite a black and white, narrow-minded, kind of ugly even person who's very judgmental, that was me. Okay, at university, I was the one handing out tracts to you saying you must be born again and you're going to hell and all the rest if you don't pray this prayer, whatever, whatever. And so, thankfully for me, that didn't last too long, just a few years. And in our life sometimes, when we hold rigid views and when we're kind of are a judgmental person, we often need a shake-up. Something to shake us up, to help us to question our beliefs and to perhaps be more open. And that's what happened to me. I had quite a dramatic shake-up in my life, and then I ended up throwing everything into the air and asking. I had more questions than answers. I questioned everything that I believed in, and as I went on this journey to seek a more authentic spirituality and something that was more loving and more compassionate and more real. And so I ended up, there's a lovely story as to how I ended up in this place, but I'll just go to the end of it, and that is I ended up as a contemplative in my spirituality. So my spirituality is now mystical, and I'm happy with the questions, and I sit with them, and that's not a problem at all. And I have a daily practice of meditation in the Christian tradition, so I practice stillness and silence. I learnt that at a Benedictine nunnery on a hilltop in a village in Ireland. And I lived there for 2 months and just enjoyed the beauty of the world around me and of silence and stillness. And I realised that of all the teachings that I was obsessed with before and argued over for hours and hours, that none of that mattered anymore. There was only one thing that mattered. There was only one teaching and one thing that mattered, and that was love. Loving who you are, loving my neighbour, and loving my enemy. So when you become a contemplative, it inevitably leaves to you feeling more fully human, knowing more who you are as being human. Because in the world today, a lot of businesses and corporations are trying to make us feel other than that. They're trying to make us feel like consumers and voters or citizens, statistics exactly, rather than a human and connecting with our fellow human beings.
Would you say, like, when you view numerology, it's like saying contemplative is a 9?
On the Enneagram, you mean?
Typical numerology.
I'm not sure about numerology. I know the Enneagram a little bit, but not numerology, yeah. So when you feel more your own humanity, then the next step is that you acknowledge more the humanity of other people and you see it, and it becomes very real to you. And then you feel connected, really very much connected to other human beings around you, not mattering where they are or what country they're in. And so as I went on my pilgrimage, I went on a retreat, and there was a retreat on non-violence given by a monk. So not an activist, it was a monk. The leader of the World Community for Christian Meditation, Father Lawrence Freeman, who teaches meditation and stillness, but yet he had this very radical teaching of non-violence. And of course, that being the teaching of Jesus, so radical. When I speak in schools, I remind the students what this teaching is. You know, it's very, very hard teaching. The teaching is love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. By this stage, the girls are kind of curling up their lips going, yeah, right, yeah, love your enemy. I don't even like them. You know, I don't know them, don't understand them, don't want to know, you know, they threaten me, I threaten, you know, it's too hard. And of course, we know the church has not been able to comprehend or figure out this teaching for 2,000 years. The church has been complicit in acts of violence over that time. But did you know that the first 300 years of the church was pacifist? They wouldn't dream of lifting a weapon because they still knew the original teaching. And so when early Christians in Rome were asked to fight for the emperor, they refused. Of course they would refuse. They could not even pick up a sword. How could they, when the teaching of Jesus, his last words when the disciples were gathered together before he was taken away? So the last words of Jesus to the church gathered in one place, what was it? Put down the sword. To Peter when he got all excited and cut off the ear of the guard. Put down the sword. Put it down. Because those who live by the sword will die by the sword. That was the teaching. And so the teaching, of course, love your enemies. And we can say when Jesus said love your enemies, I think he meant don't kill them. I think so if that's what he meant, then we really need to challenge our governments who call themselves Christian. And so, you know, when I talk in schools, I talk more, I'll skip, you know, I won't talk so much now about the non-violence tradition because you're probably very much more aware of it than when I speak to Year 10 boys. But what I do mention to Year 10 boys is that when I was at school in modern history in Year 10, I learned all about the causes of World War I and then what happened in World War I. Do you still do that at school? And then World War II. So all about the causes of World War II and then World War II. Then maybe a couple other wars, and that's Year 10 history, and that's based...
I don't think the causes of World War I and World War II have changed much since school.
No, but unfortunately, they're still doing it, as opposed to what I would suggest in the curriculum. Because when you go through high school and the history of the world that's taught you is the history of wars, then you come out of it thinking, well, maybe that's just how the world is, like war. You know, if there's conflict, if there's problems, then you go to war. As if that's normal, that's just unfortunately the way things are. But that's actually not true, and it's a lie. And so our children are going through school, coming out the other end, thinking that war will achieve something and is successful and makes sense. None of that is true. There's a great study that came out last year that compared just the last 50, 60 years of conflicts, violent and non-violent conflicts, and rated them in terms of their goals and then their successes. I'm afraid violence fails dramatically. Dramatically. War fails to achieve its goals. So if you knew that as a hunch, as a feeling within you, then you're vindicated by the statistics, because I think it was like 80% of non-violent conflicts are successful and about less than 30% are. And if you want the website for where the study is, I can give it to you later, but it's fantastic. And so when I ask them, the kids, about non-violence, I say, put up your hand if you've heard of Gandhi. So who's heard of Gandhi? And they look at me and the boys are like, oh, one of them might be brave enough. I go, yes, who's Gandhi? Oh, he was a nice man. He was from India. He did something really good, really great for his country. And I said, do you know what he did? Oh, they said, no, but it was really great. He did something really good for the people of India. Okay, so of course I need to understand. I need to then explain who Gandhi is. Why isn't Gandhi taught in our schools? Such a massive movement that changed history.
I don't remember that his wife was very, very looked down on, wasn't she? Because she tried to prove the same thing.
I'm not sure about that. So of course, what we know about Gandhi is that he read the Sermon on the Mount every day. And Gandhi loved Jesus. Gandhi was a Hindu man, and he once said, you know what? I would love to be a Christian. He said, if it wasn't for those Christians. He said, because this is such a serious teaching and so radical. And he said, I need to be around people who take it seriously, and they just don't. So of course he began his amazing journey of non-violence that managed to topple the British colonial government and change the history of India. And who was inspired by Gandhi? I asked the students this. They've got a little bit more recognition when I say Martin Luther King Jr. Oh, yes, they know. He was also a good man. He did good things for the blacks in America. Again, basically on the curriculum, unless your teacher adds that, that's not in a Year 10 history curriculum. And so isn't it a shame that the story of the last 50 years in terms of social movements and achievement of human rights in the world is a story of non-violence? Where's the curriculum? Where's that? I could go, the people of the Philippines. Remember Mrs. Marcos and her shoes and Mr. Marcos? What brought that down? This corrupt, brutal regime. The people of the Philippines coming into this main square, having been trained in non-violence. I remember they gathered in small groups, and I remember an image, and I was only young, of a woman, I think it was a nun, who put her hands up against the barrel of a tank in the main square, and the military were there in their tanks. And I say to the kids, do you know what happened next? And they went, oh, they shot the nun? And I go, because that's the natural conclusion of what they know in their life, that if there's military and there's tanks, then they shoot. I go, no. Oh, but what could have happened then? It's inconceivable. Well, what happened? The soldier got out of the tank and he stood with the nun and he put up their hands together. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. The military joined the people. Social movement, people power, the Marcos regime fell with barely a drop of blood being shed. This is it. This is what's possible. Okay, more recent one, people of the former Yugoslavia. NATO, bombs and guns. So the best technology of the richest countries in the world could not dislodge Slobodan Milosevic. Failed. War failed. What dislodged Slobodan Milosevic? Anyone know? A bunch of uni students. They got together in a back room and started studying non-violence. And I'm talking just practically, had nothing to do with their spiritual life, whatever, but they just knew that it worked. And then if you want to actually oust someone, you need to put down the weapons and get clever. So they studied the techniques of non-violence and the strategies. They had their group was called Otpor, and they had a poster just with a hand like this, and the slogan was, he's gone. And they plastered it all over Serbia. And then the trade unions got involved, all the people got involved, and of course there was an election and the result, and then there was more protests, and Milosevic fell. So this is really the story that we should be telling, the story that our children should be hearing. And of course, this is our tradition. So this is our teaching. Love your enemy. Love your enemy, do good to those who hate you. And if love your enemy doesn't mean killing them, invading their countries, hurting their children, turning them back when they come to seek refuge and safety, then we need to ask, what does it mean to love our enemy now, here in an age of so-called terror and violence? What does that mean? So back in 2003, all these words are swirling around my head and all these teachings, and George Bush, remember him? He was about to bomb. He was about to go in and hurt my brothers and sisters in Iraq, who I was deeply connected to by our common humanity. And I felt sick. And I know that many of you did too. Do you remember that time? The marches? Yeah. We were upset, we were nervous, we were anxious. What's going to happen? This is going to be a disaster. And I was feeling this too. And I'd been on my pilgrimage, and my pilgrimage took me to Tibet, and I lived in a Buddhist nunnery on the top of a hill and read about Buddhism and all the rest. Then I went to Canada, where I studied Native American spirituality. Then I was planning to go and live in a monastery in the desert in Egypt to do meditation. And this was the time that the Iraq War was starting to brew, and I just felt so anxious. I just didn't know what to do, but I wanted to do something. Didn't we all? We wanted to do something. And so I put out that prayer, as I said, a very powerful piece of writing, and it's in the front of my book, The Prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. Very radical. And when I say to students, ask them about the Prayer of St. Francis, I say, pray it if you dare. I dare you to. Because if you pray the Prayer of St. Francis and you pray it sincerely, then it will be honoured. Then you don't know where you're going to end up. Because you're saying, where there is darkness, let me bring light. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is sadness, let me bring... Pick me. Pick me, I'll go. And try to bring light and try to bring... That's saying you're going to places that are dark. Where there's sadness, where it's crappy, when it's hard and it's difficult. You're saying, let me go and try to do something. So I was praying this prayer, and I used to have this internal dialogue with St. Francis, because I used to pray this every day, feeling beside myself now as the war got closer. And I was saying, well, it's all right for you, St. Francis, back there in 13th century Italy. You didn't have George Bush to deal with, or Osama bin Laden, or Saddam Hussein, or nuclear weapons, or suicide bombers. What am I supposed to do? But I just continued sincerely to pray, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, each time before I went into meditation. And then I heard the call. And when I say call, I don't mean a spooky thing in your head that you imagine, or a dream. No. I mean a guy on the radio. A guy on the radio who's asking me to go to Iraq. That's what I heard. You could imagine how I felt. I was packing my bag to go to Egypt. I was leaving a few days later. And there's this guy on the radio, his name was Ken O'Keefe, a former US Marine, American young guy. He fought in the first Gulf War back in 1991. Remember that one? Kuwait, Saddam. And he became so traumatised by that experience, he became an anti-war advocate. So his idea was this. He said, you know what? It seems okay for our governments and our media to go and invade this country, Iraq, because they talk about the place and the people as if it is somehow different to us. And the people are somehow different to us. And like their names are Rehab and Yusuf and Ahmed, and they are Arabs in inverted commas, or Muslims, as if that was a bad thing. But they are different to us. They are the other. This is an academic concept called othering. And so he said, if they die and they're civilian casualties, it seems okay. He said, but what would happen if we went there too? Us, white people. Now here he's acknowledging a concept in the world that's very sad, but you have to admit that it's true. And that is that some lives are considered more valuable than others. And when the high school kids look at me going, oh, no, I don't think that. I say, well, okay, well, let's look at the news. Let's pick Channel 7 Nightly News. First item will be an NRL footy scandal. Then there'll be a celebrity baby, or not baby, or a bump. And then there'll be another couple of celebrity stories, some political stories that are very shallow and not about policy. Maybe 7th or 8th item on the news, if there was, 15,000 people killed in a flood in Bangladesh. If you're lucky, it may make it. Of course, some lives are considered more valuable than others. And the lives that are considered more valuable are ours. We have a privilege and a value put on us, and it's white privilege, Western. So those who are Western born or Western educated and wealthy, we have a power that we carry within that. So Ken's idea was, what if we went there too and one of us were killed? Then it would be a public relations disaster and something would have to be done. We can interfere in this war. We can put our finger in the spoke, so to speak. He said we could be human shields. We could go to important sites like water treatment plants, power stations, and live on those sites. And we could write to George Bush and the Pentagon and say, we are the human shields, we are from these countries, and if you bomb this site, you will kill us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, you could imagine. All I know is I started to shake. I started to shake, my heart started to beat inside me. I picked up the radio. I could barely believe what I was hearing. So gutsy. And it was in the framework of non-violence. And I knew exactly, as I was hearing it, that I had to go. And people say to me often, Don, it must have taken you so long to decide to be Human Shield in Iraq, you know, tossing and turning, arguing with your mother. I said, are you kidding? 1 second. Because this is what I've been asking for. This is what I've been seeking. This was an answer to my prayer. I could sense St. Francis smiling. So that was my call. Within 2 weeks, I was in Baghdad. Rang the travel agent, changed the plans. 2 weeks I was in Baghdad. The Human Shield movement was spontaneous. It was a bit chaotic. It was just people responding from their hearts. About 800 to 1,000 people gathered in Baghdad as part of the Human Shield movement. And people came and arrived at different times between February, March 2003. And we weren't all there at the same time. It was like a tag team, people coming and going, spending the time there that they could. Some had to get back home. Many of it, people had jobs to go back to and families, but many people stayed right through. We were from 25 countries. The youngest was 19, students from Spain. And the eldest was an 85-year-old grandmother from America. And we were everything in between. And the media loved to classify us as in a certain way, like we were radical, young, hippie, socialist, anarchist, radicals. And whenever they did that, because I was managing the media for the Human Shields, I would wheel out Godfrey for an interview. Now, Godfrey was a white-haired, silver-haired, very elderly British gentleman. And he was posh as anyone you'd find, a plum in his mouth, and he loved the Queen. And he was a Tory, he was a Conservative, and he was a Presbyterian lay preacher. And he always wore a suit. And so when the media called us hippies and socialists, or anarchists or whatever, I'd bring out Godfrey. And Godfrey in his suit would say, I've come to Iraq to be with my brothers and sisters of the book, the Christians and Muslims of Iraq, in their time of danger and fear. These are the exact words. I've come to stand with them, to bring my peace from my family, etc. This is what the movement was about, people responding. And we knew when we were there that we were representing all of our friends and family back home. And we knew about the marches and the demonstrations going on all over the world. And the Iraqi people knew it too. So much so that the Iraqi TV channels put a reel together of all the marches and put it on constant loop on the television so that people could see. So I'm just going to share a few stories from that first trip to Iraq now, and there's a bit of a theme to most of them, and then we'll have some discussion. We can talk about all sorts of things.